Welcome to the League of Women Voters of New Brighton area Candidate Forum. This evening we have two candidates for the House from 39B and one for from 40A. So Sandra, Katie, and Kelly. The League of Women Voters is a 104-year-old organization. We are nonpartisan and nonprofit. By nonpartisan, I mean that we do not support or oppose candidates or political parties, no matter whether they're running for a nonpartisan or partisan office. We do support voting, however, and encourage people to participate in their local, state, and national governments wherever is possible, and to participate in our democratic process. Our moderator this evening is Florence Sprague from the Roseville League of Women Voters, and she will begin in just a minute, but I must ask people please to turn off your phones. We do not allow videotaping of the forum at all or use of your phones for other purposes. So, Florence.
Thank you, Betty. Good evening again, and welcome to this forum for the candidates for Minnesota House seats 39B and 40A. Thank you for taking the time to view this forum, whether in person here, we have a wonderful audience here in person, or on cable TV or the internet between tonight and November 5th. My name is Florence Sprague. I'm a league-trained moderator and a member of the League of Women Voters Roseville area, and I'm a resident of Maplewood. So love them or hate them, I don't get to vote on them. Okay. We do ask that no campaign buttons or campaign attire be worn in this room. There's usually a place outside the room where you can have your literature to distribute, if you'd like that. Please remain quiet as possible while the candidates are speaking so that everyone can hear, and hold applause and other signs of recognition till the end of the forum. Let's keep the time for the candidates. All opinions presented tonight are those of the candidates and not those of the League of Women Voters. The candidates participating in tonight's forum have all agreed to the forum rules, which were included in their invitation to participate. And a copy is posted outside this room, I'm sure, for the rest of you. I know they will give us a respectful and informative evening. This forum is being broadcast live and recorded by NineNorth for later viewing. Check their website for the rebroadcast schedule. A link will also be available soon after tonight on the website of the New Brighton Area League of Women Voters. It is the League's policy to record and post the entire candidate forum without editing, so that the public will see the event in its entirety and not just selected scenes or sound bites. Excerpts or edited clips of candidate forums may not be used for partisan or political purposes. Before we begin, well, she's already said, turn off your phones, make sure your ringers are off, our last chance. Okay, thank you. We'll begin with opening statements of up to 2 minutes from each candidate. Then we'll go to our question and answer period, and then they'll have closing statements at the end. Questions have been emailed in to the organizers of the forum, and the in-person audience may submit questions by writing them on cards. I assume you have cards, or no? No, you don't have cards? Oh, okay. Do you want to? If you want, well, okay. Though, when I already, as you see, I already have a whole collection here that got emailed in, so I wouldn't guarantee that if you had any that I would get to them. Because there's always more topics that people are interested in than we have time for. And so you should always feel free to reach out to the candidates outside of the forum, either tonight or just in the intervening weeks. Check out their websites and their literature if we don't cover your topic of interest. Okay, unless I note otherwise, candidates will have 1 minute to respond to each question. There's a timer seated in the front row. Could the timer wave, please? Thank you. And the timer has a 30-second warning sign and then a stop sign when time is up.
15 seconds.
Oh, a 15-second. Okay. See, we all do things a little differently. Okay. Candidates should then finish their sentence and stop so that everyone gets a comparable amount of time to speak and we can end on time. I'd like to introduce the candidates now. There are 2 candidates vying for the Minnesota House seat 39B, Sandra Feist and Katie Jacobs. Kelly Moeller is running unopposed for House seat 40A. With that, let's begin with the opening statements. Candidates, okay, again, 2 minutes, beginning with Sandra Feist.
Great. Thank you so much. I am very excited to be here tonight. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for organizing this forum. So I am Sandra Feist. I have had the honor of representing our district for the last 2 terms, and I'm running for re-election. I am a mom of 2. My kids are in middle school and high school in the Mountains View School District. I'm a small business owner. I founded my law firm in 2010, and we are now a team of 11. And I am honored to be your current representative. I chief authored 39 bills that passed into law this legislative term. And I didn't really put this together, that it was 39 and it's 39B until yesterday. But I feel like that was on purpose, or as a sign. I am really proud of the policies that I advanced. They're really common sense policies. For example, I secured funding for the first phase of a 50-year Clean Water Action Plan. We need to protect our water supply for future generations. I also, as the vice chair of the Public Safety Committee, focused a lot on public safety. And the investments and reforms that we passed this past term are things I'm really proud of. Investing in public safety, supports for struggling youth who are disruptive. We reformed our probation system. These are a lot of things that I like to call them the unsexy bills, but they're really important legislation that isn't always top of mind or in the news, but really needs to get done, and that's where I focused a lot of my time. I'm also really proud of the work I did protecting the interests of seniors this last term. Both sessions, I championed bills that protected the legal rights of seniors in Minnesota. And I also am incredibly proud to be the DFL House co-lead of the Civility Caucus, which I'll talk about more, but my time is up. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The next opening statement is from Katie Jacobs.
I want to thank the League for hosting this event this evening. I know that there's a lot goes into it, and I appreciate the time they've put into it. I'm Katie Jacobs, and I'm a 31-year homeowner in the district. I reside in Columbia Heights with my husband, Jake, and our caring terrier, Chloe. I currently serve as a council member in Columbia Heights and also operate my own business, performing assessments in the substance use field for DOT and general misuse of testing issues. I'm also a common sense candidate, and why? Because I have a history of and have seen government perform over time. I'm running for House because I do not believe in personal agendas or party politics. I believe in crossing the aisle and battling it out for the constituency, shaking hands at the end of the battle, knowing we did right for the people paying our wages, no matter the side you represent. I believe good governance comes from balance. However, balance is not about the numbers. It's about compromise for the good of the community, whether that is local, district, state, or federal. I also believe in transparent communication, and I am committed to being actively available to each of the 3 communities in District 39. I also believe we will not, nor should we agree on every issue. If we do, one or both of us is not reviewing all aspects of that issue. Sometimes what is best for you as an individual may not be the best for the majority, and that's why we always want to compromise. More compromise is needed in our representation, and information is available for me outside in the hallway when we're finished this evening. Thank you again.
Thank you. And the final opening statement from Kelly Moeller.
Thank you. I'm Kelly Moeller, and I'm the state representative for District 40A, all of Arden Hills and Mounds View, and parts of New Brighton and Shoreview. I have deep roots in our community, living here for over 25 years with my husband, and we have 2 sons who are recent graduates from the Mounds View Public Schools. Thank you for the opportunity to serve at the Capitol since 2019. Listening to your concerns and turning your ideas into action is one of my favorite parts of being a state representative. Multiple bills that I've authored and that have passed are based on ideas from you. In the past legislative session, 2 of my past bills are a result of constituents reaching out. And I've also been able to help constituents, sometimes without legislation, just being able to get them to the right resource. As a prosecutor and a victim rights advocate for over 20 years, I have dedicated my career to public safety. And at the Capitol, as chair of the Public Safety Committee, along with Vice Chair Feist, we have worked to prevent violence, to seek justice for victims, to fund law enforcement recruitment, to address gun violence, and to address systemic racial disparities. As a parent of recent graduates, I know how important education is to our district. We made a historic investment in our students, including funding for evidence-based reading curriculum. 2 of my bills to support student mental health have passed, and I will continue to work hard on that issue. Making life more affordable for families continues to be a priority. In addition to saving families money by passing free breakfast and lunch for students, we passed legislation to reduce the cost of prescription drugs. And I'll continue to work to provide more accessible and affordable health care and child care. Finally, consumer protection is important, and my bill related to event ticketing will provide more transparency to consumers and forbid deceptive practices when you go online to get those Vikings tickets or entertainment tickets. Thanks again to the League for hosting, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. That concludes the opening statements. We did the opening statements in alphabetical order, but here on out I'll be mixing things up, and I will try to be clear on who gets to go first and all. But I don't want the same person to always have to be first or last, or you're always following the same person, so I've tried to mix them up. Okay, first question, pretty straightforward. We will begin with Sandra Feist. What is your top priority if elected for District 39B?
Thank you so much for this question. So my top priority is to support kids. That is through fully and strategically funding our public schools, as well as through continued investments through our public safety budget in youth. I am kind of obsessed with a mathematical formula around our education budget called compensatory revenue. It's a really huge part of our education budget that we threw out of whack when we passed universal meals. And I'm super excited about universal meals. It's so important. But because of that, we actually need to take a deep dive and do a math problem to make sure that our education budget is truly strategically reaching the students that it most needs to meet. And on the public safety front, I've got 15 seconds, so I'm just going to end with kids. My priority is kids. Thank you.
Thank you. Next response will be from Kelly Moeller. Same question.
Thank you. So my biggest priority, especially with the work that I've been doing in public safety sphere, is gun violence prevention. We've really been able to pass a lot of great legislation the last couple of years, but more work needs to be done. Guns are the leading cause of death of children and adolescents in the country, and we can and we should do better. There are a couple of bills that I have on my radar for when we go back into session. One is a safe storage bill. The author of the bill last year has perfectly pointed out that when guns get into the hands of the wrong person, whether that's children or somebody else who shouldn't have a gun, usually it's because a mistake was made. Often a gun wasn't stored properly. So that one is a high priority for me. Also, another bill is reporting lost or stolen firearms, and then looking at military-style assault weapons. Thank you.
Thank you. And the final response on this question, Katie Jacobs.
Even with historically increased funding for education, the power for decisions has been removed from local educators. There are currently 65-plus mandates that are either unfunded or very underfunded, and it creates a boggle in the local budgets of the school districts, and they're unable to take the money and place it where it needs to be spent. Minnesota schools went from 6 nationally to mid-pack. Proficiency scores are down. Reading in math are 16 and 17%, science 23%. We're just not preparing our generations for stepping into the adult world. The other passion I have is about fiscal responsibility. We have the highest income tax in the nation, and we also have, or one of the highest, and the highest corporate tax at 9.8%, making our state very much less desirable for big business. Democrats need to focus on the middle class, but not in the positive way. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question responses will begin with Katie Jacobs. Okay. What unique skills do you bring to public service?
I have been in management in both in the corporate world. I own my own business. I have been a council member for 4 years. Prior to my being on the council, I spent 3 years attending all of the meetings and tutoring myself on what would be needed as a council member. And I have also served in positions, 501Cs, and also for my union. I was the employee assistance professional and served about 2,000 flight attendants in life crises.
Thank you. Next response to this question, Kelly Moeller.
Thank you. So as I mentioned before, I have deep ties to the community, having lived here for over 25 years and being a volunteer in a variety of different ways at school and church, also on the Public Safety Committee for the city of Shoreview. And I would say as my role as a prosecutor, which is a job, I didn't go back this summer, but usually I go back in the interim. It's a job I've continued to do, and I have a real passion for gender-based violence. For protecting victim privacy is something I've worked really hard on, and I've brought that work over to the legislature with bills that I've worked on, but also bills to rewrite our criminal sexual conduct statutes to provide more fairness and justice for victims of gender-based violence, domestic violence as well. So I would say that experience as a prosecutor has served me really well at the legislature.
Thank you. And the final response on this question, Sandra Feist.
Thank you. So I would say that one of the unique skills that I bring is the ability to work across the aisle and collaborate with my colleagues of all different political perspectives. As the DFL co-lead of the Civility Caucus, which is a bipartisan, bicameral group of legislators that work together to create opportunities to build relationships. For example, we just went to Second Harvest Heartland and packed chickpeas for 2 hours together. Those types of experience allow us to build relationships that then we can parlay into collaboration. So I've worked with my colleagues across the aisle on data privacy legislation. My tax forfeiture bill this last year was a really big deal, and it's something that was very important to my Republican colleagues, and their input and collaboration was really critical to the final product. I just love those. They call them less glamorous bills in NPR, and that's my wheelhouse. Thanks.
Thank you. Responses for the next question will begin with Kelly Moeller. What strategies would you like the state to implement for job creation and economic development?
Yeah, so before I answer the question, I'll just say, too, that CNBC ranks Minnesota as number 6 for business. We're actually highest in the Midwest. Our unemployment rate here is lower than the national unemployment rate. And some of the things that we've been able to do are get small businesses grants, especially for those areas where communities are struggling. Also, angel investor grants to be able to help people to start new businesses. We have a program now that's secure choice retirement for those small businesses with employees to be able to have retirement in place when they don't have a big corporation helping provide for that. So those are just a few things. I would say, too, important here is housing and transportation and childcare and all of the things that we need in our community that businesses need and workforce. We've done a lot in that, so I'd like to continue working on workforce development. Thanks.
Thank you. Next response from Sandra Feist.
Yeah. Thank you. So I am a small business owner. I'm actually hiring, but yeah, sweet. But yeah, I mean, I know the challenges that one faces as a business owner. Balancing your desire for growth and your comfort with risk, and we need to make sure that we're supporting business owners. I had the privilege of serving on the Economic Development Committee, and I was surprised by how inspiring it was to see the way that we could use these grants to really encourage entrepreneurs across the state. I also worked with the governor's office on a bill to create the Office of New Americans within the Department of Employment and Economic Development. And the Office of New Americans exists for the sole purpose of ensuring that immigrant and refugee residents in Minnesota are able to integrate into our workforce as efficiently as possible. Because according to our state demographer, we have huge workforce shortages, and they are looming, and they're getting even worse. And so making sure that these talented new residents are able to integrate into our economy at the height of their professional capabilities is really critical to Minnesota's future business environment.
Thank you. And the final response on this question, Katie Jacobs.
When we look at population growth and the predictions, the 2050 regional population forecasts are anticipating about 600,000 regional population growth requiring jobs. I think it's very important that we support both small and larger businesses in the community and in the district. Household sizes are estimated to drop, except for the over 65. They're anticipating that it's going to double. So we need to look at both ends of the spectrum and provide those services that are necessary for both the young people coming into communities as well as those that I refer to as the sunset generation, or those that are entering retirement and living on fixed incomes.
Thank you. For the next question, responses will begin with Sandra Feist. What measures will you take to protect consumer rights, privacy, and safety?
Thank you. So privacy is actually something that I care deeply about. There's the saying, I don't know if I should say it publicly, but I will. Apparently, we're called the Black Helicopter Caucus. It's a bipartisan caucus, those of us who are a little bit concerned about our privacy. One of the bills that I introduced last session was a bipartisan bill that would look at what's called reversed warrant tracking. So this is both search terms as well as location tracking. And it's where law enforcement basically just says who looked up a search term or who was in a specific location, and then uses a warrant to collect the data and location of private law-abiding citizens, and it's not okay. So I look forward to continuing to work on legislation like that. I would love to beef up the Student Data Privacy Act and continue to work in this very bipartisan space to protect data privacy in Minnesota.
Thank you. Next response, Katie Jacobs.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Sure. What measures will you take to protect consumer rights, privacy, and safety?
I think that consumer rights, there's so much fraud and the spam that takes place on a daily basis. I don't think I'm unusual when I say I get 75 to 100 spam emails and text messages in any given day. I think that the internet in some ways has gotten ahead of us, and we need to get a control on that. I think it's going to be a very difficult and very challenging thing to pull in. We need to protect our rights. We need to put solid policies in place that will do that. And I think that's what we need to do going forward.
Thank you. And the final response in this question, Kelly Moeller.
Thank you. As I mentioned in my introduction, I had a bill that was related to consumer practices for ticketing. So it actually arose out of mine and many others' experience trying to get Taylor Swift tickets, and the mess that was. There was a lot we can do in that space, and we can continue to work on, but my bill prevents deceptive practices and creates a lot of transparency around consumer ticketing. That was the first really consumer protection bill I worked on, and I really enjoyed it. And again, I think there's more work that can be done in that space and other spaces, including a bill that I have related, that I'm working on, related to assisted living facilities and contracts that people have with those homes. They're not getting the services they're paying for. So that's a space I'm interested in. And also long-term care insurance, long-term disability insurance, also not getting the services people paid for. So I'm really excited to go back and work on some of those consumer protection issues.
Thank you. For the next question, responses will begin with Kelly Moeller. Staying with economics, how do you plan to address economic disparities within our state?
Yeah, so again, we were able to do a lot around with grant funding, I think there's been a lot of talk about the surplus funding, and a lot of that funding was one-time funding. And so we were able to put a lot of that money into grant funding. We've had grants for housing has been a huge issue. We invested $1 billion in housing, and some of that is really going to address some of those racial disparities, with whether it's redlining or the racial covenants that people have on their houses. We have processes that we've had in the past that, while they might be banned now, have resulted in racial disparities in all sorts of areas. I just mentioned housing, and I have 15 seconds, and there's not enough time to address all the other areas, but that's one example.
Thank you. Next response, Katie Jacobs.
When we talk about the surplus, we need to remember that it was almost an $18 billion surplus, and we were originally promised $2,000, and the average of return was about $260. The trifecta spent the rest of that and increased our taxes by another $10 billion. It's billion with a B. The governor signed legislation of about $3 billion in tax cuts, and while this is also very true, it's also misleading because all of the fees and the taxes are projected to raise billions and increase the two-year budget by 40%. An example is the child tax credit was expanded while limiting qualifying earnings. Other examples are reducing the deductions for Social Security, but keeping us one of only 12 states that tax Social Security. Higher taxes on license tabs, gas, metro, sales tax, motor vehicle, and fishing licenses, payroll taxes, and delivery fees were also increased. Record inflation that we haven't seen in 50 years. We need to find a way to tax equitably and in an affordable way so that we're not pushing people out of their homes.
Thank you. And the final response on this question, Sandra Feist.
Thank you. So the tax budget in 2023 actually was the largest tax cut in Minnesota history. It cut taxes on middle and low income Minnesotans. And I would point to the child and working family tax credit as an example of actual targeted tax credits that supported families who were struggling and needed them. In particular, I hear so much about childcare and the unaffordability of childcare and how important that is to struggling families. We eliminated the Social Security tax on 75% of Minnesotans, and the remaining Minnesotans who receive that tax have income from other sources, and it's important to fund those sources for low-income seniors. I also look a lot at the disparities in our public safety injustices and how that has economic repercussions for families, and I'm focusing on that.
Thank you. Okay, responses on the next one will begin with Katie Jacobs. If the state were to run a surplus again, what would you want to do with it?
Well, first of all, I would like the state, before it runs a surplus again, as astronomical as what we've had recently and in previous years, I would like them to readjust the tax base. In 1971, we had 10 to 11 tax brackets, and today we only have 4. And I think that speaks to a lot of the disparity that we see in our economics. If we're consistently and constantly loading up the surplus, somebody's being overtaxed. And if we're being overtaxed, it is affecting how we buy our groceries. It's what we put in the money we put in the gas tank, and it's how we afford to live day to day. Those things need to be brought into focus and into hand.
Thank you. Next response, Sandra Feist.
Thank you. I'm really proud of Minnesota's progressive tax structures. I think it's really important that we invest in things like our education, our infrastructure, our public safety, and I think that we have the right balance. 20 years of political gridlock led to a very large surplus, and we invested that surplus in Minnesotans. If we had another surplus to work with, would be very excited to invest in our schools. Investing in our schools is investing in our future. I also am really passionate about using our public safety budget to make Minnesotans safer and make Minnesota a more just place for all Minnesotans. The probation bill I mentioned, it's a super boring bill, but it's really important. When we have an effective, well-funded, strategically funded probation system, that means that people who have struggled are able to get back into our communities and back into our economy, into jobs, into the workforce, and that's so important. And I also am really excited to invest in a clean clean energy economy. Again, investing in Minnesota means investing in our future, and thank you.
Thank you. And the final response on this question, Kelly Moeller.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think it's important too to think about the surplus and really three buckets. When people talk about spending for that, it also includes savings. We put $3 billion unspent. That's in addition to savings that about $4 billion that's already on the bottom line. And then we put savings into a disaster contingency account. So just so people know, unlike the federal government, Minnesota, we have to have a balanced budget. And we have a lot of money in savings, which we need for a rainy day. And I think that that's really admirable. We also did tax cuts and rebates, as I think Representative Weiss said. It was the largest tax cut in Minnesota history. I'm really excited about the child tax credit. It's estimated to lift 1/3 of Minnesota children out of poverty. So whatever we can do to reduce poverty for children, for families, especially for seniors on fixed incomes, I think those are all really great investments. And then, as Representative Weiss said as well, public safety and education are two priorities for me.
Thank you. Responses for the next question will begin with Kelly Moeller. And this is going a rather different direction. Discuss why you do or do not support ranked choice voting.
I do support ranked choice voting, and one of the main reasons why I support that is because I think it can really turn down the temperature in election season. If I'm going door to door and asking for people for my support, and I get to the door and let's say I'm running against Representative Feist, and they say, oh, Representative Feist is my first choice, instead of trying to throw her under the bus, which isn't something I would do anyway, but I would say, well, would you consider me as your second choice? I'm not going to try to say anything negative about her. I want to get the voter to support me as their second choice candidate. And I think that sort of mentality, like I said, can really bring down the temperature in an election and can also offer the voter the opportunity to vote who they really want to vote for, not fearing that they're throwing away their vote for someone who's never going to win.
Thank you. Next response, Katie Jacobs.
I'm not in favor of ranked choice voting. I'm a bit of a dinosaur, I guess. I believe that when you have a candidate that is running, statistically, everything I've seen, it shows that the person who is usually the first choice, when you go to ranked choice, they are not the person selected. That's it. It's a
Okay.
pretty done deal for me.
Yeah, that's okay. Just want to give you your time. Final response on this, Sandra Feist.
Thank you. I support ranked choice voting. I was going to say much the same as Representative Moeller. I experienced ranked choice voting when I first ran for the endorsement, and it really did turn down the temperature. There were 6 candidates, including me, and everyone was amazing. We were just like slightly different versions of people who shared values. And I consider a number of those people like my very good friends now. And I'm grateful for the way that ranked choice voting played out and kind of brought us together.
Thank you. Responses on the next question will begin with Sandra Feist. Affordable housing is a problem everywhere. What policies would you support to ensure adequate housing for residents of all income levels in your district?
This is a really complicated issue, and it pits a lot of people who generally agree with one another against one another, or we have like slightly different angles that we come at this issue from. It's really clear that we have an affordable housing crisis, and it's really clear that part of that relates to zoning. My colleague Larry Kraft introduced a bill called the Missing Middle last session, and I had conversations with the local leaders in each of the cities in 39B, and those were really good conversations. I was able to bring concerns back to Representative Kraft, and he was able to incorporate them into his bill. That bill ultimately did not pass. It needs more work. But I do think that that conversation needs to continue. I don't think that just providing, credits and grants to people to buy a home is going to solve the larger dilemma that we face.
Thank you. Next response, Kelly Moeller.
Thank you. Yeah, the issue with housing, there are short-term housing needs, people who need shelter right away, and in the space I'm in public safety sphere, thinking especially of victims of violence, victims of trafficking. But then we also need to think about long-term needs for housing, not just short-term needs. And again, the racial disparities that we have had historically in Minnesota, and how do we help first-time homebuyers? We were able to put some funding towards that to help first-time homebuyers. So I'm interested in continuing that, looking at the data on some of the things that we've done, especially with the grant money that we were able to provide in different areas this year, really examining that data, how it's working out, and perhaps extending some of those programs. Specifically in my district, we have Rice Creek Commons. It's the largest parcel in Ramsey County that's undeveloped, and I'm interested in seeing that built out, and I carried a bill for bonding related to that.
Thank you. And now the final response in this question, Katie Jacobs.
One of the things that we've done in Columbia Heights is we have put a cap on rentals in residential areas. And one of the reasons for that was to somewhat control the corporate landlords who are coming in and buying up property and making them, the price goes up and they're unaffordable to people who want to get into a home for the first time. I recently talked to some young people who it was a sad conversation because they just bought a home and said that they don't believe that they're going to be able to keep it long term and still pay for groceries and health care and put gas in the tank because the house payments are so high that they hope against hope that it's going to work out in their favor. However, they're not confident. They think that their home ownership is going to be a short-term adventure, and that's not what home ownership should be.
Thank you. Okay, next question and responses will begin with Katie Jacobs. Can you outline your health care policy proposals?
One of the things that's happened recently and in the last few years is that legislation is placing more burdens on hospital operating costs, forcing us to pay more annually for our premiums for health care. And insurance companies raise the premiums, they pass that along to us. They're raising the operating costs to the consumer, leaving the most vulnerable in our communities behind. And there's a lot of micromanaging of many industries. I mentioned childcare before. Childcare is one that's micromanaged, and they've closed more than 1,000 providers in Minnesota in recent years, making it more expensive, less accessible, and fewer options available to working parents. I think that we need to look at ways to bring some of that money back, as possibly as a tax deduction, so that some of those expenses can be recuperated for parents of small children or of children.
Thank you. Next response, Sandra Feist.
Thank you. As a parent, I have really struggled with our healthcare system recently. Just trying to get my son's prescription refilled was like a nightmare. It was like a week-long nightmare. I had to drive places because I literally couldn't talk to a doctor's office. Our healthcare system doesn't seem designed to provide care. It seems like an industry, and I think that's a problem. That is a massive problem. I don't know that I'm prepared to solve, but I do appreciate the leadership of my colleagues. Senator John Marty, Representative Liz Ryer. We need to find ways to reorient our healthcare system around care and around access. The bill that I carried that related most directly to healthcare was the nurses bill. That bill addressed the issue that nurses are leaving the bedside at record rates because hospitals are putting their profits over the safety of patients, and that is something that I continue to want to work on.
Thank you. Final response, Kelly Moeller.
I support the idea that Minnesotans will be able to buy into Minnesota Care as another option. I think having more options, affordable options, is one way to help address this issue. Part of the problem is caused by greed, frankly, from insurance companies and big pharma. And we have been able to do some around prescription drug costs, lowering prescription drug costs. I'd like to look at expanding some of the medications that we already we included this last time. In addition to that, as I mentioned before, I have a bill on long-term care insurance and long-term disability insurance. There are many people who have purchased these policies. When it's time for them or their loved ones to use these policies, they are being denied the care that they paid for and that they deserve. And that, to me, that's just an example of the greed that we have in this industry. And there are so many different areas that we can work on.
Thank you. Next question responses will begin again with Katie Jacobs, and we'll stay with healthcare. In looking at health insurance and coverage, do you support the inclusion of covering non-traditional or non-Western or a wider variety of services such as acupuncture?
Certainly. I think that as we progress and as we learn more about some of these ancient treatments and approaches to healthcare, I think that as well needs to be covered. There are so many things that in conventional healthcare that are not covered, or you have to go through so many loops to get the coverage on it. We're faced with a situation in our own family where, because my husband just went from conventional insurance, I'm ratting you out, dear, to Medicare, he's no longer eligible to have his hip replaced at a suite and has to go to a hospital in Chaska. That's going to incur a lot more cost, and it's a difference. I think that if we can bring in some of these, I believe in acupuncture. I have had it. I've used other methods that are not conventional, and they work, but it's out of pocket. And when we can't afford to do the things that we need to do, that out of pocket expense is overwhelming.
Thank you. Next response, Kelly Moeller.
I have also used acupuncture, and I found it to be helpful. And I think probably, I'm sure all of us and everybody in this room could share stories of all of the hoops that we have to go through, that we have gone through, and just trying to get coverage for services that we need. So whether that's something that's more traditional or less traditional, I think anything that's supporting well-being is important. One of the things we did around mental health was making sure that we didn't have to have prior authorization for mental health and some other services. So just trying to simplify the process so people can get the care that they need and deserve. Healthcare is a human right. It should be treated as a human right. We need to stop jumping through all of these hoops just to get the care that we need and deserve.
Thank you. Final response on this question, Sandra Feist.
This is a really interesting question, and I haven't thought about it before, but I'm definitely open to it. In my law practice, I had the opportunity to work with someone who had a medical degree from India. It was a full medical degree, all the same level of training that you'd have for a medical degree here in the United States, and she was an expert in what's called Ayurvedic medicine, and it's not considered a medical degree here, and it's not an area of practice here in the U.S., but she was able to open up her practice here and provides Ayurvedic care, obviously under existing law, but the idea that we would provide resources to help people receive that care and that treatment that might work for them where traditional medicine hasn't, I think is great.
Thank you. Responses, and the next one will begin with Kelly Moeller. Last session, several bills on redistricting were proposed but did not make it to the floor for a vote. How do you think that redistricting should be done? What would you want to see in a bill if it comes up this year?
I'm really interested in redistricting and using the technology that we have now with AI, taking the human element out of it and plugging in all of the different factors that need to be considered when we're thinking about redistricting, and having that human element out of it. So you're not having any chance of a partisan-based redistricting. You're really trying to rely on an objective, putting in the data and having an objective response. So I would like to see something like that.
Thank you. Next response, Sandra Feist.
Thank you. That kind of scares me, Representative Fuller. As you can tell, I don't know if I trust technology. I'm really interested in some option that, again, does take it out of partisan hands. So like a nonpartisan board that would be appointed and would be able to make these decisions. I think something that really does take it out of the whims of politics and partisanship is better for the state of Minnesota.
Thank you. And the final response on this question, Katie Jacobs.
I agree about the AI. It's scary stuff. It's scary stuff. I would like to see a nonpartisan approach to it. I think that we need to level the playing field. Some districts are overwhelmed with population, and other districts much, much lower. I think we need to make those tables even with and make it more approachable. And I think by making it more approachable, I think that we'll make it much more easy to represent the district.
Thank you. Okay, the next question, I'm going to trip up the timers and say, could you please give them 2 minutes for this next one? Because at least I hope you'll have lots of thoughts on it, one way or another. We'll begin with Sandra Feist.
Ready.
What specific policies would you work on to have the state, well, it didn't come out quite right. What specific policies do you want the state to implement to combat climate change?
Thank you. That is an important question. As a mother, I think about this a lot. I talk about this a lot with my kids. My daughter's giving me like big eyes. So like I mentioned, one of my big projects is to get a 50-year Clean Water Action Plan funded. That is something that I worked on with the University of Minnesota's Water Council. They are a multidisciplinary, vast network of these brilliant water scientists. And it's really important, as climate change impacts not just Minnesota's climate and environment and our natural resources, but also the whole country, the whole globe, it's going to have an impact on our water supply. And we need to make sure that we are protecting our own water supply, as other states may want to have access to it. We also need to look at issues around just chemicals, PFAS, just looking at our water supply, making sure that it's healthy. So that's something that I'm really, really focused on. I'm really proud of the work that we did this last term to transition to a clean energy. Something that I was lobbied on by middle schoolers was our Solar on Schools bill that we passed in 2023. We can use our schools to generate solar energy, and it's also an educational opportunity for kids. And I didn't know about it until a bunch of 12-year-olds came and met with me in the office, and I was like, that's a good idea. I'm signing on to that bill. So there's a lot that we can do around solar and wind and just kind of, decreasing our reliance on fossil fuels. It's also something that we should think about from an economic standpoint and be really realistic that as we're investing in a clean energy, it's shifting where jobs are. And we want to make sure that we're creating a clean energy economy that's supporting workers in Minnesota as well.
Thank you. Next response, Katie Jacobs.
Sustainability is always going to be connected to the economy and to energy. And if we can't afford to do the things that make our environment healthier, other than the day-to-day stuff, recycling our trash at home and taking plastics, going down to the recycling center, doing those types of day-to-day recycling in our neighborhoods, and keeping our waterways clean of contaminants, we need to have affordable alternatives to heating and cooling our homes and businesses. And Sandra Feist just touched on that a little bit. We need to make solar and wind energy more affordable. I know that there's a lot of people who are interested in solar replacing their main energy source, but they can't afford to put it in. And I think that providing grants I don't think is the answer. I think we need to provide some non-returnable money to these people who want to invest in these things and bring us forward. We can't redesign almost 300 years of independent lifestyle to replicate the conservation of many of our European friends and countries. It's baby steps, but we can get there.
Thank you. And the final response on climate, Kelly Moeller.
Yeah, so Minnesota is one of the fastest warming states, and the frequency and intensity of the rain has increased here. So this is absolutely something we have to address here, the rest of the U.S., the rest of the world. We did have a bill that passed to be carbon-free by 2040. There are some off-ramps there, and when they passed a bill, I think it was back in 2007, to have at least 25% of the electricity from renewable sources by 2025, the utilities actually reached that goal earlier. So I'm really excited about all the things that are out there with regard to solar, with regard to wind. I just read an article about perhaps a new battery that doesn't require nickel and copper, because we have to be mindful of the resources that we're taking out of the earth for some of these things, and also making sure that we're recycling for those people using their phones or all the electric cars. We need to make sure that we're recycling those materials again, and also building up our capacity for storage to make sure that we can electrify the things we want to electrify. I am an EV owner. And I think we definitely need more EV charging stations, and we're going to be seeing a lot more of those. Thankfully, with some of the federal bills that have passed, we are going to be seeing more of those built out in Minnesota. You mentioned a lot with clean water, and I think we also need to be doing as much as we can to address invasive species, because that is a real issue for us here in Minnesota. And then solar in schools is amazing. We have some electric buses now too. And I think really thinking about this from students to agriculture, climate change is affecting us in so many different areas. And I would love to see more work being done in the schools to help connect students with these potential clean energy jobs of the future.
Thank you. Okay. Let's see responses, and the next one will begin with Kelly Moeller. Do you support the Minnesota ERA, and how would you work to get it passed in both houses?
I do support the ERA. I was proud to vote yes for that bill. I'm seeing the Senate author in the audience here as well. But I do know that the coalition worked really hard on the language, and we will continue to work on the language. It's really important to make sure that we're recognizing that all people have equality in this state. It really is as simple as that. So I am a strong supporter of that, and I will be glad to continue to support that work.
Thank you. Next response, Sandra Feist.
I too support the ERA and thank Senator Kunesh for her leadership in the Senate. We were asked how to pass it through both bodies. I don't think we need to worry about the Senate. And yeah, it was really inspiring to pass it off the House floor. Due to the vicissitudes of the legislative process, we both passed it, but different versions, so it didn't pass into law this year. But I look forward to working to ensure that we pass the most inclusive, broad ERA in the country in Minnesota.
Thank you. And final response in this question, Katie Jacobs.
I am very, very much in support of the ERA. It's a long time coming, should have been done a long time ago, for the reasons that both of my compatriots up here have stated.
Thank you. Okay, next question responses. We'll begin again with Kelly, it looks like. Okay. How do you view the role and responsibilities of a representative in regards to anti-racism work, diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Well, one of the things that we did a couple of years ago was we declared racism a public health crisis in Minnesota, and there was a work done to look at all the different areas where we have disparities and make recommendations. So we have a lot of work still to do in that area, implementing some of those changes. And I could give you a laundry list of some of the things we've done already, but I think really what it basically comes down to is acknowledging that racism and discrimination are very much a part of the world today. Listening and learning, it's on all of us to learn about discrimination and racism. It's not on someone else to educate us about that. We need to learn about it. We need to understand how history creates a lot of the problems we see today and prevent that from repeating itself. And we really need to be allies to people who need our support. And when they have ideas, let them lead on those ideas.
Thank you. Next response, Katie Jacobs.
I think that I would agree that you cannot legislate emotion. And I think that it's incredibly important in our school district, District 13 in Columbia Heights and part of Fridley. They have, I think, one of the most diverse populations in the state, or at least in the metro area. They're underfunded in ESL teachers. It's paid in arrears. They can't operate a school budget in the red. It creates problems for them and frustrations. We need to understand that we need to have all of the services available to each of these individuals, and we need to be welcoming in them. I'm a firm believer that you need to know where you've come from in life to know where you're going, and I think that's part of the process in being equitable and being fair to all.
Thank you. And the final response, Sandra Feist.
One of the things that I love most about representing District 39B is how much the issues of justice are centered in the priorities of our residents. When I am knocking doors, this is what I hear, that people want to make Minnesota and our community a more just, inclusive place for all. And I try to live that at the Capitol. And, one of the key ways, as Representative Moeller said, it's by lifting up other people's voices. One of the bills that I was most passionate about that we passed into law was to create an Office of Restorative Practices. I could go on for a really long time, but I don't have time. But just trust me. The whole point is to make our legal systems more just and effective. And the way that we developed that bill and the way that we presented that bill was by lifting up the voices of people who were impacted, who were able to share their stories and how much this would mean to them and their lives and their communities.
Thank you. And you get to go first on the next one. Okay. The tenor of our national political debate has put the concept of trust firmly in the middle of the public debate. What will you do, if elected, to earn the public's trust in you and your ability to treat all your constituents with honesty and fairness?
Well, I think this is a really important issue. It's why I care so much about Civility Caucus, about building trust across political divides. When people reach out to me, I always make it a point to respond. Even if we're disagreeing on something, I think it's really important that I be forthright and open with where I stand. And I also try to build a level of, comfort, even where we do disagree. I have one constituent who we don't agree on anything, but we've realized we do agree that baseball is amazing and we love music. And so we have a really good dialogue where we're able to talk about issues where we really come at it from a very different perspective, but it's from a place of mutual respect and understanding one another as humanity. And I think that's a really important aspect of being a representative.
Thank you. Next response, Katie Jacobs.
And may I ask you to repeat the question again?
Yes. The tenor of our national political debate has put the concept of trust firmly in the middle of the public conversation. What will you do, if elected, to earn the public's trust in you and your ability to treat all your constituents with honesty and fairness?
I think part of the issues, you need to meet the constituency where they're at. You need to meet them in their neighborhood. You need to talk to them in their homes or in their yards. And you need to hear what they have to say. I'm sorry, I'm going to leave the answer at that.
Okay. And the final response on this question from Kelly Moeller.
I try really hard to respond to constituents who reach out to me. I read all the emails, and if people take the time to write an email, I do my hardest to try to get them a response. And we may not always agree on something, but people deserve to be able to contact their elected officials and get a response. Also, the same way, when people reach out with an issue, like maybe not a bill, but just having trouble with something like my driver's license isn't here yet and it's taken 3 months, I need help. I don't try to find out, are you a Republican or a Democrat? You're my constituent and you need help, and I will try to get you to the right information or resource. Sometimes it results in bills being authored. The constituents I've worked with, I have no idea what side of the aisle they sit on, if at all. It doesn't matter to me because they have a need and I can try to help them with that need.
Thank you. Let's see. Oh, well, Sandra may not believe it, but she goes first again. Okay. Gun violence is now the leading cause of death for children. It's above accidents and things that you might otherwise expect for young children. Can you discuss your stance on gun safety measures?
Yes, as Vice Chair of Public Safety under the preeminent Chair Moeller, who cares so deeply about this issue and has led on it, I've been really grateful to be part of a legislative session that was able to actually make progress. Our background checks bill, our red flags law, those are saving lives, and I'm really proud of the work that we did. We didn't pass our safe storage legislation. We passed it through the House. We were not able to pass it into law, and it is so important. And I would like to emphasize that safe storage is actually a bipartisan issue. When I was first elected, I was working across the aisle, working with Second Amendment advocates on a bill, just looking at ways that we can encourage safe storage. So I would just like to emphasize that everyone agrees that safe storage is really important to keeping Minnesotans safe, keeping children safe, addressing death by suicide, and I'm committed to continuing to work on that.
Thank you. Next response, Kelly Moeller.
Yes, in addition to the bills that we passed for background checks and extreme risk protection orders, and I'll say the data that we're getting on that is that these protection orders are going to court, and courts are granting the temporary removal of guns for people who pose a danger to themselves or others. So they are really important and are having an impact. We've both talked about the need for safe storage, and what we're requiring in the bill is how the NRA says people should store their guns. So this shouldn't be hard. This should be something that we should be able to pass. We also have a working group that's working this summer on making sure that abusers, people who have convictions for domestic violence, are not able to access guns. They're already forbidden by law from not having them. We want to make sure that we're doing all that we can. We've got law enforcement working on this, the courts. They're going to come back and give us recommendations on how we can make sure that we're preventing guns from getting into the hands of abusers.
Thank you. And the final response in this question, Katie Jacobs.
I think what we've done legislatively is a step in the right direction. I think we need to go much further. I am a gun owner. I've grown up in a hunting family. Have hunted in multiple states for multiple types of food that went on the table. I'm concerned. I am a little bit concerned about the blocking or storage, just because it's going to be difficult to make sure that there's compliance with that. I think that we need to include mental health, and I think we need to have a longer waiting period before somebody. I think 10 days is not enough, 14 days is not enough. I personally would like to see a 30-day wait. You got to plan ahead. You know, if you're going to go hunting in Colorado, that you're going to need that gun and you're going to need that license. It shouldn't be that difficult. I really think we need to go much, much further with our gun control.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. Next one, the responses will begin with Katie Jacobs. What are your policies to support marginalized and vulnerable groups, such as the LGBTQIA?
I think that we need to, from an educational standpoint and from a school perspective, I think we need to provide information at all levels that is age appropriate. I think we need to be open and not so judgmental about those individuals. I have members of my family that belong to that group, and I know what their travesties have been. I know what their stumbling blocks have been, both before and after transition. I have family members that still live in the closet because of the prejudice in my own family, which really saddens my heart. We need to be accepting of them. There's nothing scary about it. It's just a part of what we should encounter and embrace in any given avenue that we walk down.
Thank you. Next response from Kelly Moeller.
Our LGBTQ plus community is currently under attack in this country. The language, the rhetoric, The laws that are prohibiting people to live their full and authentic selves have to stop. And anything that we can do on the state level to recognize the full humanness of every human being, regardless of your gender, your sexual orientation, your sexual preference. This is why we need an ERA, among many other reasons. I'm proud we've done some things like prohibiting conversion therapy. We've provided protections for those who are receiving gender-affirming care, but we have slim margins, frankly, in our legislature, and I want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to protect the laws that we've recently passed so that they don't get turned around like they have in other states.
Thank you. Final response on this question, Sandra Feist.
So this is something that is so important, and we have made progress this last term. The trans refuge bill, my gender inclusive menstrual equity bill that acknowledges that trans boys exist. Our banning of the trans or gay panic legal defense when somebody murders someone. These are all really important steps in the right direction, and they're also an important statement that we see and we support the LGBTQ community. One of the kind of random but exciting bills that I'm kind of excited about for next year is a bill that I signed on to last year that would support the LGBTQ business community and look at ways that we can use our economic development grants to support this community. So there's a lot that we can do, and there's a lot that we must do, and I'm really looking forward to continuing to lead in this space.
Thank you. Okay, that was everybody. So now we'll start the next one with Kelly Moeller. One can hardly go anywhere without rerouting oneself to get around road construction. But this work is never done. What do you see as ongoing or future infrastructure priorities for the state of Minnesota and your district?
So it is true, in Minnesota we have two seasons, as they say. We have construction and winter. As our two seasons. But we have a lot of roads, we have a lot of bridges here, we have a lot of infrastructure needs. Our infrastructure is aging. We had a bridge collapse in Minneapolis, like we all know this. So we need to do everything we can to make sure that we have sustainable funding. The gas tax is dedicated to roads and bridges, but we also have to be thinking as we're moving to electrification, what are we doing to make sure that we're still getting the revenue that we need to ensure that we can handle these projects. We passed a very robust bonding bill in 2023 that puts money in infrastructure throughout our entire state. So we need to continue to pass bonding bills to provide for that. I've had a water main in Arden Hills. The question asked about specific for district, and as I mentioned before, there was some infrastructure needs for the Rice Creek Commons area in Arden Hills that I would love to see pass.
Thank you. Now to Sandra Feist.
So this is a really critical issue, and Representative Mueller covered that our tax system is going to fund our infrastructure investments, which is so important. It's a really important issue in Columbia Heights, as we know, as we're looking at Central Avenue. How do we make sure that it is a safe space for pedestrians and people who want to go to the businesses, and also people can get from point A to point B? How do we do both of those things at once? And that's going to take creativity and money, and I'm grateful for local leadership on this issue and the collaboration we've had with MnDOT. I also hear a lot from residents of New Brighton who would really like more access to public transit going up, from the Twin Cities Metro, up north. And so that's something I'm really interested in. And looking into it, it turns out the county is a big piece of that puzzle. So I'll be looking into that some more. And specifically, I was working with our watershed district on 35W flooding funding. That's a big issue. It impacts our low-income communities and manufactured housing communities along 35W in 39B.
Thank you. And the final response in this question, Katie Jacobs.
Sandra already touched on Columbia Heights. We've had our fair share. We've had some preliminary work done along Central Avenue prior to them taking care of whether in what capacity or how that's going to lay out the changes to Central Avenue and Columbia Heights. And we're now looking at 40th Avenue. Driving around the district, I see a lot of stuff going on. It's been mentioned we're an older infrastructure. Thank God we have the money to apply it when we need to. I will mention that I was 6 minutes away from that bridge collapse coming home from the airport that day.
Wow.
It was devastating. Sorry. We've got the infrastructure, we've got the money. Columbia Heights is being very proactive in trying to keep the cost down to the residents for some of the work that we're going to have to do in the future, our public works building. The infrastructure's there, the money is there, and if it's not there, we're very proactive in going out and getting it, and I would see that as being part of the district approach as well.
Thank you. Responses for the next question begin with Sandra Feist. Okay, does the state of Minnesota's government have a role in addressing the issues of immigration? Why not discuss what you think it is, whatever?
Yeah. So I would like to quote the Republican governors of Utah and Indiana who wrote in a 2023 editorial, "We need immigrants who are ready to work and help build strong communities." They also wrote of anti-immigrant voices that, quote, "they call immigrants a burden against all evidence from economics and history," unquote. I would also like to quote the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce in its report in 2021 that, quote, "Unauthorized immigrants' access to taxpayer-funded programs in Minnesota is extremely limited. Unauthorized immigrants and temporary residents, such as students, tourists, or visitors, are the most restricted and access only to emergency medical assistance and coverage of services through the end of pregnancy. In reality, this group doesn't represent a significant cost or burden to the taxpayer's bottom line." I would also like to quote the conservative Cato Institute, which said that first-generation immigrants pay more in taxes than they consume in benefits. Over the last 15 years, refugees have contributed $124 billion to the American economy. In 2021 alone, immigrants paid $28 billion in taxes, and I support immigrants and look forward to supporting them as a state representative.
Thank you. Next response, Katie Jacobs.
It falls underneath the federal jurisdiction. I think that there's some responsibilities that go with it. I think that, one of the problems we face in our state is education, which is micromanaged, but it goes back to the English as a second language teachers. My understanding is in our district alone, we needed 10. They could only hire 5. We need to make those services available. I think that immigration needs to be controlled by the federal government. We have individuals who are taxpaying in our own communities and in our own state who do not qualify for some of those same benefits because they make $5, $10, or $50 too much. And I don't think that's an appropriate approach to funding or providing subsistence to these individuals.
Thank you. And now Kelly Mueller.
I will say that similar to the rhetoric that's going on nationally against the LGBTQ plus community, there is similar rhetoric and hate going on against the immigrant community, which is frankly perplexing to me because unless you're Native, you are descended from immigrants. Immigrants make this country better. Immigrants make this country who we are. And I think while it is federal and we definitely need the feds to work on this issue, there are times when they want to get local jurisdictions involved. And I think we can tell the feds to mind their own bleep business when it comes to this. One of the particular areas that concerns me is with respect to protections for immigrant victims. We have specific visas that protect those. Project 2025 wants to eliminate those visas. That will not make us safer. That means victims won't come forward. It means if an undocumented victim sees you witnessing a crime, they're not going to stick around. So we really need to be mindful of how the federal is impacting us at the state level.
Thank you. That's everybody, right? Okay. Next question begins with Kelly Mueller. How do you plan to address failing student scores statewide, especially in reading and math? What needs to change in Minnesota's education system?
Well, I am really excited about a couple of the bills that we passed. First of all, the universal meals, free breakfast and lunch for all students. Kids can't learn if they're hungry. So that I'm really excited about. But more specific to reading, we passed what's called the READ Act. It's an evidence-based curriculum. And we passed funding for that. The schools are already implementing it. I was just talking to a teacher neighbor the other day who's doing the training. She says it's really good. I I am interested in looking at what additional funding we might need for that, because I think some schools might need some additional funding for that implementation. But I'm really excited to see the data coming out of the READ Act implementation. The other thing that's really near and dear to my heart is student mental health issues. We need to make sure that we're addressing all the mental health needs of our families and our students, and putting more resources in schools. Minnesota is pretty poor on that level, and we can be doing a lot better.
Thank you. And now moving to their right, Katie Jacobs.
I think that the micromanaging of, there's historic funding that has been provided to the education system in the state, but I think that the micromanaging makes it very problematic. We're not allowing the educators to take and apply that funding where it needs to be applied. I think having a mental health facilitator on campus at the schools would be instrumental. I think, the health illness occurs most likely between 14 and 24 years old. That's that middle school through high school age. And I think we need some more effective programs for critical care that are available that are underfunded.
Thank you. And final response on this one, Sandra Feist.
Thanks. My daughter just gave me a thumbs up, so I must be doing okay. So education is an area of passion for me. It's one of the main reasons I ran for office. And one of the bills that I was really excited about last session was a bipartisan bill I worked on with Representative Kristen Robbins to require schools to have a cell phone policy to address the impact of cell phones in schools on student academic attainment, mental health, and behavior. It's an issue that I'm continuing to do listening sessions with students, teachers, community members. It's a really complicated issue. It's not clear to me what the role of the state is, but it's clear to me that there is something going on, and I would love to be part of the solution. I also, as I mentioned, I'm super obsessed with this really boring math issue called compensatory revenue, and I've gathered this whole group we had a meeting of like 50 people who all need to have a voice in coming up with like a new formula, and that will be more strategic in how we are targeting funding to students who are not meeting academic standards.
Thank you. Okay, now I'm going to throw the timers and other problems. I just want to squeak in one small question before we go to closings. So give them 30 seconds to tell us all, what have you read recently that you didn't have to read for work? And we'll start with Katie Jacobs.
Oh, boy. I'd like to say a newspaper. I honestly have, between campaign and my client load, let me just say that nobody wants to have a substance abuse problem in the summer when you've got barbecues and you've got fires to sit around. So when the fall comes, everything just escalates. So between everything that's going on, I have honestly not had an opportunity for about 2.5 months to read anything that wasn't necessary. And I can't wait to get back to that.
Well, newspapers are great. Okay, Sandra Feist.
So I read a lot of trashy romance novels, and I won't tell you any of those. But I did read
those on the road as a flight
cool.
attendant.
Yeah, I read an upscale book, though, recently. It's called The Paris Dressmaker, and it was about the French resistance in Paris during World War II. It was very inspiring, and it just makes you think about, like, what would you do if it, like, came down to it, to, like, stand up for your values, stand up against evil. And I'm not, like, calling anyone evil, because that's not where I go with this, but it just was really inspiring me to just think back to history and to think about who we are and who we want to be.
Thank you. Kelly Moeller.
I tend to listen to books while I'm getting ready. So the last book that I listened to was called Fever in the Heartland, and it was about the rise of the KKK 100 years ago, starting in Indiana and from the city I'm from, actually. And I highly recommend this book. What's really scary to me is that history is repeating itself in many ways. The attacks, not only racial attacks, but attacks on immigrants, attacks against Catholics, which I don't think are being attacked now, but that was just interesting to me because I went to Notre Dame, and there were attacks on campus there that I didn't even know about, having attended that school. So it's just a really fascinating history. Again, an example of we don't want history to repeat itself. We need to educate ourselves.
Great, thank you. Oh, and we're right on schedule. All right, now that concludes our question and answer portion. We're going to closing statements. Each candidate has up to 2 minutes for her closing statement. We'll do them in reverse order of the openings. And is that all I want to say? Yeah, that's okay. So we'll begin with Kelly Moeller, who is the candidate for House District 40A.
Thank you. And I don't know that I'll have a full 2 minutes. I didn't write anything out because I just wanted to see how the questions went and how tonight went. Your questions were amazing, so thank you for asking us about a wide variety of topics. And thanks again to the League for hosting this event. I think one of the pieces that you touched on, Representative Feist, was your collaborative spirit. And I like to say that I share that same spirit at the Capitol. The public safety, the big omnibus public safety bill that we passed on the House floor had unanimous support. And that was a pretty amazing experience for me. I try really hard to find common ground with people. One of my closest friends at the Capitol is a Republican. She cares a lot about gender-based violence. We work on those bills hand in hand. We alternate being author and co-author. She helps me with her caucus when we need support on something. And I think we just need more of that in politics. Most people that are in local and state government are truly in it for the right reasons. And so I think just for everybody to remember that, it's really a small percentage at the local and state level who are in it to like go viral or be on Fox News or be on whatever, MSNBC. Most of us are truly in it for the right reasons. So I guess I would just ask everybody to remember that we're human beings. We serve you. We want to hear from you, whether you disagree with us or not. And it's just such a joy and pleasure to represent District 40A. I don't have an opponent, so I'm pretty sure I'm going back. And so I thank you in advance, but also please do feel free to reach out to me if I can help you in any way. Thanks.
Thank you. Next closing statement from KT Jacobs, the candidate for House District 39B.
Okay, thank you. Again, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting us this evening. A lot of great questions, and a lot of the legislation that has been passed in this session and in the previous session has either created or increased state spending. The trifecta has spent part of our surplus, some of it on good things, some of it on not so necessary things. They've raised taxes by $10 billion. Biennium projections indicate another $10 billion increasing coming in the next 2 years. That's an increase that's 5 times higher than the tax cuts that were recently passed. Cuts that leave us with higher taxes, smaller paychecks, and struggling to make ends meet. The legislature has done much for many, but we need to look at what our local or district legislation can do to improve the fiscal stability and quality of life for our district. And I question whether the personal agendas of others in the legislature may reflect our own. We need to focus on district first and move forward with that. This evening discussion hit on just a few of the issues that are on everybody's minds. I'd like to be available to unpack the damage done by party line politics and personal agendas of the trifecta. I'd like to bring back some common sense, and I pledge to spend the taxpayers' money wisely and efficiently in reducing overtaxation and surplus taxes. Thank you.
Thank you. And the final closing statement from Sandra Feist,
Thanks.
also for 39B.
Thank you. So I have just been truly honored to serve as the representative for our district for the last 2 terms. I truly believe that serving in this role has made me a better person. It is really true that we can get caught in our bubbles and be surrounded by people who agree with us and not hear other perspectives. And I have had the privilege of hearing from people in our community who don't agree with me and having dialogue and learning. That's helped me to also work better with my Republican colleagues. I can think of one example. We had a big snowstorm a couple of years ago, and I used that day to have like deep conversations. And so I had a Zoom meeting with a Republican colleague about an education bill of mine, and I met with him and the Republican House researcher in education application, and they actually changed my mind. And I changed my bill as a result. And I believe that, my ability to be open to my Republican colleagues is a reflection of our district and the, people who reach out to me who have opened, my mind. Like, I have very strong opinions, but I try to really be open. I try to learn, and I try to be respectful. So I really love this job. I love the fun parts, like going to parties and meeting people. But I love the boring parts a lot. I love negotiating. I love writing bills. I like working with colleagues. I love working with lobbyists who come in and they're like, we have opinions, but they also have expertise. And, crafting good law on behalf of the people of Minnesota is such a privilege and such an honor. And I feel like I've got the energy and the creativity and a lot that I want to accomplish in these next 2 years, and that's why I'm running. I passed 39 bills that I chief authored into law. I'm like the Energizer Bunny, and I want to be your Energizer Bunny. So I would be honored to earn your support in November. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's our last closing statement. So, thank you all. What an interesting evening it has been. I would like to remind the audience that all opinions expressed tonight are those of the candidates, and the League of Women Voters does not endorse any candidate. I want to thank all of the candidates for stepping up to run for office. It's not easy, and it's a great responsibility. We need participation in all aspects of democracy for it to work, from informed voter to elected official. A special thanks to the candidates with us tonight for sharing their time, knowledge, and positions with us. Thanks to the audience for their attention. Thanks to the camera crew from NineNorth and my League of Women Voters colleagues for making this all come together. Remember to tell your friends and family to check out the NineNorth website for the rebroadcast schedule. The link will also be available on the New Brighton Area League of Women Voters website soon. The League researches issues important to our members and to the health of our communities. If you're interested in finding out more about what we do and how you could also make a difference, please pick up a membership brochure at the registration table or visit us at lwvmn.org. Membership is open to anyone age 16 or older. And to all listening, now that you have more information, ponder your options seriously, and then please vote on or before Tuesday, November 5th. Early voting is open, and encourage your family, friends, and neighbors to vote thoughtfully. If anyone needs to update their registration, request an absentee ballot, locate an in-person polling place, or track a ballot. Go to mnvotes.gov. That's easy to remember, and it takes you to election information on the website of the Secretary of State's office. It has all the answers in about 10 languages. For a voter guide with statements from candidates for many offices, try vote411.org. Thank you for listening. Good night and good luck.